All right, Keith. Listen, we're delighted to join you in what is, I suppose, difficult circumstances. But I suppose to give people a bit of a context, what we're doing here is we've pre-recorded a show all around the Construction Contracts Act, and in the last 2 weeks, there's been drastic changes to how everyone is operating first and foremost, but secondly around what some people might need to be aware of in terms of contracts going forward. So first and foremost, I have to say thanks very much for giving your time to us again. We really do appreciate it. You're quite qualified in terms of arbitration, mediation, adjudication, and you're also well known for these workshops that you're doing around them subjects with the CIF. Can I kick off first of all with, what's your current take on the current lay of the land? What are you hearing out there? How are people getting through this? I suppose is a good place to start.
Yeah, well, I suppose most people are trying to keep the head down. There's an awful lot of, I suppose, positive stuff going on some of the sites with, health and safety, I suppose, coming to the fore, and people, I suppose, just having another look at it and trying to instigate the 2 meter and separation, which isn't an easy thing to do in construction, to be fair. Like, it's even from a health and safety perspective of guys lifting plasterboards, lifting plant, carrying, distributing plant around projects. It can be difficult for guys to do stuff on their own. There's requirements there in regard to, obviously if someone was to fall or get hurt, if they're on their own, who's keeping an eye on them, and different things like that. Just the practicalities of building. It's a different kettle of fish. So there's good things being done in that. I suppose the difficulty is, can this continue on? In a lockdown scenario, I know the CIF and others are strongly advocating that it does, and there's practicalities behind that in terms of, obviously with the housing issue going on and things like that.
Yeah.
That the idea of pressing pause on these things for, what could be, who knows? We started in this thing end of March, end of April, end of May. How long will this be for? And then how long will it take to ramp up? Added to the fact that we have a labour shortage and everything else in the industry, the idea, I suppose, just the fear of getting all this thing to stop and then trying to reboot it up again is just a difficulty. But I think, from personal health needs to kick in,
Are we facing it? Is it inevitable that this is going to happen? Do you think? Are we looking at a shutdown across sites?
I think it's inevitable that we'll get a shutdown across not just the building industry, but I think a shutdown. If everything keeps going the way it's going, I suppose the view being that we don't fight this curve, well, then everything may need to close down. So I think it isn't a construction or not construction thing. I think construction is just, it's an important aspect of our economy. We keep it going as long as we can. But if a lockdown scenario comes whereby basically everybody has to stay home outside of possibly going to the shops for food, I think that's likely to happen at some stage if nothing else changes in this curve. I think it is.
I mean, with that in mind, there's going to be a lot of people worried about, and the second part of this that we're going to push out will cover a lot of the Construction Contracts Act and some of the protections in there. But I mean, the term force majeure, is that something that you've...
It's a wonderful term that will become, more...
First of all, can you explain what that term means, and if it's something
it's a French, it's a French term. It means superior force, and the logic behind it was always that if something happened well outside the control, was unforeseen by either party, it's not in the control or has got anything to do with either party, that prevents a job from being completed. Floods, earthquakes, different things like that would have always been the main items in construction, that this thing would basically press pause on a project, and that neither party was at fault, and that basically a builder could claim force majeure and get an extension of time. And now there's no definition in law. We don't have a definition in Ireland in regard to this, but it is in certain contracts, not in other contracts. So it very much comes down to your contract. And anyone who's operating under the RIA standard forms clause 30, it's the first item on the list in regard to an extension of time. One of the kind of delay options is force majeure. But it has the impact of basically pressing pause on a project. Public works jobs, different kettle of fish. You don't see force majeure in there, but you do see, issues relating to government and directions of government and legislative powers and things like that. So again, you have to look at your contract. Force majeure is purely a contractual thing. So if you don't have a contract, then force majeure doesn't even come into the equation, because you don't have a rule book. Yeah. So one of the rules of your rule book isn't in there, let's say. And the most important thing about it is you also have to be careful in regard to what does it give you if you go down that route anyway. And what you'll find in many instances is that force majeure may give you time, but you may not have any right to claim any additional costs. Yeah. And all that goes with that. So that's one of the two aspects that most people are looking at, force majeure. The other one is frustration of contract, as to whether your contract has got to the point where it's so frustrated that it's incapable of completion. Which is another kind of term. Now, the difficulty with frustration will in theory mean your contract comes to an end. If you're successful with frustration, you're basically saying that, look, this thing has happened outside our control. We could have never foreseen it, but it has happened, and our contract is incapable of completion on the back of it. So the contract actually comes to a complete end. Okay. So that's the other term that you're going to start hearing, I think, a bit more. So.
Is there going to be some level of negotiation here between, main contract or subcontract? Let's say, listen, none of us seen this coming, and will there be? Do you think that people will be in a position to renegotiate contracts?
It would certainly be my hope. Like in something like this, which is completely curveball. Like, nobody can sit here and realistically say that this is someone's fault. In most discussions and arguments, it's someone has to pay. There's always somebody who has to pay. But in a scenario like this where it's nobody's fault, it couldn't have been foreseen. Now, it couldn't have been foreseen to anyone who's in a contract 6 months ago. People signing up contracts last week and the week before, they're in a different kettle of fish on the basis that it could have been foreseen. And if you've signed up a contract in February, March, you'll need to get advice specifically in regard to that, whether any of these options are open to you, because it was foreseen and will be arguable that it was foreseen. But let's say you've signed up a contract before Christmas. Well, in that scenario, I would hope that the industry realistically has to come to a point where, we have an adult conversation, is what I call it, and people don't just go straight to the trenches. If people go to the trenches on these things, people like me will be very busy and that's all wonderful, but it doesn't do any good for the long term of the industry. So It's one of those times when I think pressure will have to be taken out of the melting pot, and people will have to sit down and kind of say, look, it's happened. Now, how can we fix it without crucifying each other? And that's what I would hope will happen, but not always.
Yeah. What can companies do now to navigate potential contract disputes before they do become a bigger problem?
Well, I think the biggest thing fundamentally that people need to do is be aware of what their contract says. So you have to operate on the space that you have a contract, and what do I have to say on that? So starting point will always be, do I have to, this is an event that has happened, so do I have to give notice of that event? And if you're in a public works contract, categorically yes, irrespective, you issue a notice to the other party outlining that this issue has arisen, and basically you're given notice that there may be a claim in regard to additional cost or time coming down the line. Now, there's specific requirements in public works in accordance with clause 10 and clause 9, and you have to specifically state what part of the contract that you're relating to. So being aware of your notice requirements. So what I'd advise every contractor, full stop, is you issue notice to the other side. This event has happened. You don't know the impact of it, but a cost or time may come down the line, and at least you'll have complied with your notice requirements. And that's kind of the starting point for everybody.
Yeah, that's good.
Issue that letter. Fundamentally, issue that letter. The other thing you're going to have to do, now there's a difficulty here, is when we're not in lockdown, has this happened? Like in theory, if you're working away on a building site, has this happened? So some people will say, like, there is builders out there closing their sites today, tomorrow, last week. On what basis are they doing it? I think at the minute they don't really have a basis to do that. In a lockdown scenario, that's a different kettle of fish. So now every one of these will have to be looked at on their own merits. A particular job might have closed down because 3 of the lads got sick and it just didn't make sense. Tested positive, whatever, and common sense, health and safety, it has to close down. But keeping records in regard to the impact of this will be important. So, this isn't a get out of jail free card for people. Yeah. So if you're already on a job and you're already delayed, the idea that you can turn around and blame this for everything and get away with it is it's just not going to happen.
That's the problem we face, isn't it? That there will be elements of guys that will use this as a great excuse now to create a dispute and to get...
Absolutely, absolutely. And that can't happen. So what's important is that if it's impacting you, is that you send a notification, but you're clear on how it's impacting you. Your job, and you can show that your program was up to date, up to March, this segregation thing, because at the end of the day, you might have had 4 guys working in a room, you now only can have 1 in order to keep that 2 meter segregation. So, but records of all of this, and actual records, who's on site, etc., what are they doing, so that you can sit down and actually prove at a later stage, if need be, down the line, that you had 1 guy doing this operation when clearly you would have always had 2, therefore it's taken 40% longer, etc., etc. So records are going to be important, and so notification, keeping good records. So you can't just sit on your hands and say, I'm going to get this guy to pay all of my costs and all of my all of my expenses, and I'm not going to do anything about it. It's vitally important that everybody mitigates any cost that they can, so that when that switch is flicked and we all get back up and running, that you can show that you've done everything in your power to negate the impact on your business. If you're then going to try and claim the cost of that off somebody else, you can't just sit on your hands and then claim full tilt for everything, and I've done nothing to bring the cost down.
Absolutely. So, in terms of your own primary business, Keller and Associates, how has this been impacting yourself?
I suppose other than the learning technology and learning how to use Skype and all these wonderful things, we haven't, I suppose, directly been too, like I'm now, I've moved home, I suppose, with expectation of the lockdown. So I'm now operating out of the dining room as opposed to the office. But outside of that, we're as busy, but we're advising people on this stuff every day. So the phone hasn't stopped. I put up a post on LinkedIn there, look, if anybody, about a week or so ago, just saying, look, if anybody's worried about, give us a ring, and the phone hasn't stopped, to be fair. It's a lot of people, a lot of worry. Where do they stand? And I suppose one of the big things coming up will be how you get paid for the work you have done up to the day of the shutdown, if the shutdown happens. Making sure that, that all happens, because life goes on. As much as we go on about these things, bills still need to be paid, and if you have done £500,000 worth of work in March, and come the end of March we have a shutdown, you still have to be in a position to chase that money and get paid that money, and pay your supply chain and pay your staff as much as possible. So I do foresee that there may be an element of kind of difficulty at that point.
And that's the big worry, isn't it? That if the money dries up at the top, and then we end up taking out 20, 30 subbies because they've dried up money at the top. That's the big worry. We hope that doesn't come.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there hasn't been a huge benefit, in terms of cash flowing through the industry in the last year. There's been a lot of roadblocks and jams for certain contractors, and because of that, things like this where money might dry up for main contractors and stuff, or clients, and that feeding down through the supply chain can be a huge difficulty, and like, there's no doubt about it, and as much as we hope and anticipate that this doesn't happen, but this is the type of scenario where easily people can go to the wall. There's no way of sugarcoating that. These are the types of events that just, unfortunately, if you haven't got the money to pay the bill, and it's a difficulty, you know.
So, Keith, if people want to find you, if they have got some questions around contracts and they are worried about this issue coming forward, where can they find you?
Yeah, the easiest place is through email, through our website, quantitysurveyor.ie, or just send us an email, info@quantitysurveyor.ie. We also have the adjudicator.ie website, and again, you can contact us through there. And both, particularly the adjudicator website, has lots of information in regard to this, and we'll be updating it in regard to contracts probably this week, just when I get around, when I get time to stop answering the phone.
And I suppose
we'll update that.
The episode following this is a detailed conversation around the Construction Contracts Act itself, so people can follow up to that as well. Keith, again, listen, thanks very much for giving us your time and getting this information out there. We really appreciate it.